You've always been told that an introduction should have three parts: the hook, the bridge, and the thesis. And that is correct. Those are the three parts of an introduction. But an introduction is more than just this mechanical putting together of these three pieces. An introduction also has a rhetorical purpose. And as a writer, you need to worry less about the mechanics of hook, bridge, thesis, and more about the rhetorical function of an introduction. Now, you can see some hints to the rhetorical function of the introduction if you look at the kind of hooks that students are generally taught how to use. Students are told to start with a quote, find a quote from some famous person who has something pithy and important to say. Then explain that quote before you then bridge into what your thesis is going to be. Or maybe you've been told, use a startling statistic. Grab the reader's attention right up front by telling them some statistic that's going to shock them. Or give some historical background. Well, why do these hooks work? Because they are providing the two things that rhetorically an introduction needs to provide. Because what is the rhetorical function of an introduction? The first rhetorical function is to give the exigence. Why is this important? Why should I even care about it? So when you're doing a quote, typically they tell you to start with a quote from like Albert Einstein, someone who's very well known, who's very famous. Start with a quote that's really kind of brilliant, that makes someone stop and go, wow, I hadn't thought of that. What they're essentially telling you is find exigence. Find something that sounds important that the reader is going to read and go, oh my gosh, yes, yes, that's absolutely true. I need to read about this. Same with startling statistics. By giving someone statistics that they didn't know, by giving them some fact that's just really wow, outrageous, you make them go, oh my gosh, there's something here I need to know. You give them exigence, a sense that the topic is important. Historical background. Well, you're not going to be giving the historical background of something unimportant. If you're giving the historical background of something, you are focusing on the facts that are important, which means you're getting to the exigence of it. Because the first thing that you need to care about when you're doing intros is that there is exigence, that this intro should set you up to really be important. And that means this hook is probably going to need to be a lot longer and beefier than it has been in the past. Now, ironically, when you're doing a timed writing, sometimes you run out of time and you actually leave both the hook and the bridge off altogether, and the only thing you will write is your thesis. But do realize if you do that, you're also guaranteed to not get a great grade. You can pass, you're just not going to get a great grade. So, what is the second rhetorical function of an introduction? Context. The human brain hates learning about isolated facts. They just don't want to learn isolated facts. The human brain wants to say, how do these facts fit together? So, if I create something that almost makes a pattern but not quite, see? I say, hey, I want you to remember that. And then I take that away. Oops, got to actually erase it. And then I take it away. Well, if I were to wait a while and ask you to reproduce it, there's one of two things that's going to happen. Either you will have created a context. You would have put it into a larger picture. So you would have said, oh, it had a circle here and a circle here and then a line here. And I remember that because it looks like a smiley face that got smushed in a vise. So it's all crooked. Or maybe you're going to say, ooh, I remembered that because it almost looks like a cat face, only parts of the cat face are removed. In other words, if you can put that basic shape into a larger picture, the brain can remember. But if all you're trying to do is remember randomly two dots, and a line, and you've not put them into context, the brain doesn't remember it well. So what an introduction does is it says, I am giving you this information here. However, you have to understand that this information is part of this larger pattern. And when you are learning it, keep in mind, this is the larger pattern. I am simply showing you these parts of that larger pattern. And so the context will help people both understand and remember the information that's provided. Thesis. What does your thesis have to be? Your thesis has to be a clear statement of what your purpose is. If what you're doing is a rhetorical analysis, well, if you're doing a rhetorical analysis paper, you've got a number of things you need to include. So in a rhetorical analysis piece, you need to give me the author of the piece. You need to tell me the title of where it comes from. You need to give me the author's message. And you need to give me the two rhetorical choices. By the way, make sure those two choices are in the exact same order as the two body paragraphs that you are then going to have in your essay. If you choose to have three body paragraphs, then tell me the three rhetorical choices. So if I am doing a thesis and I've done a rhetorical analysis of Plato, I might say something like, the author Plato, in his famous allegory of the cave, argues that humanity is locked in ignorance and must overcome that ignorance and in order to achieve knowledge. That's the message. And he shows this, or he supports this message through his choice to set up the entire essay as a question and answer between Socrates and his student, and his heavy use of metaphor. So in that thesis, I gave you the author, Plato, the title of the piece, Allegory of the Cave, the author's message that humanity is trapped in ignorance unless you do something to break out of that in order to receive knowledge, and the two rhetorical choices. The first one was his choice to set it up as a question and answer, and his choice to make heavy use of metaphor. So that would become my thesis. Your thesis is going to look a little bit different if you're doing an argument, like a DBQ, or just the straight argument essay where you don't have any texts to pull from. So if you're doing an argument essay, you're going to start with the position. What is it that you're trying to argue? And then you're going to give me the topic 1 and the topic 2. So if I'm going back to the causes of war essay, I might, in my thesis, do something like state my position. Machiavelli is absolutely correct when he states that war can never be postponed unless it is helping the enemy. And this is clearly seen in the historical examples throughout World War II. So my first topic is going to be World War II. And the wars throughout the ancient world. And that's going to be my second topic, the wars throughout the ancient world. So sometimes my position is going to do a half and half. So I'm going to say sometimes true and sometimes not true. So maybe I'm doing the DBQ for the dumbest generation. Well, in that case, I might say something like, well, Bomberline is correct that the modern generation of under 30s struggle with daily life skills. He completely discounts that young people actually have more academic skills than earlier generations. So, what's my position? My position is sometimes he's right and sometimes he's wrong. But if you paid attention, you would have seen topic 1, I didn't just tell you what topic 1 was. I agree. I said he's right when it comes to life skills. Topic 2, I said he's wrong when it comes to academic skills. So, but in either case, if you're doing an argument, you get this position, topic 1, topic 2 structure. Now, in both the cases, whether you're doing a rhetorical analysis or whether you're doing an argument, I showed you an example or talked you through an example where it was one sentence. And a lot of times one sentence is preferred because it gives you a very clear roadmap for the reader that this is where the paper is going. However, you can actually break that up into 2 sentences. So if your rhetorical analysis paragraph is feeling very, very long, I'm sorry, not your paragraph, your thesis. If your rhetorical analysis thesis is feeling very long because of all the required pieces. Remember, you had to have the author, the title, the message, and then the 2 rhetorical choices. You can choose to break those so that maybe in one sentence you have the title, the author, and the message. And then in a second sentence you say, this is shown through the author's use of, and then give the 2 rhetorical choices. So the thesis, it can be 1 sentence, it can be 2 sentences. Either one is correct. So bridge, easy squeezy. In a bridge, you take 1 or 2 words from the bottom, you take 1 or 2 words from the hook and the top, and you pull them together into one sentence so that you have a transition that references a word from the top and a word from the bottom. Remember, we've talked about the fact that you can have bridge transitions in body paragraphs as well. The only trick to a bridge transition is I've got 1 or 2 words in here that come right straight from the top, and I have 1 or 2 words in there that come right from the thesis. And you are mixing that information from the top and the bottom together into one sentence. That's what makes a bridge. So, what is it that you actually need to do in this particular introduction? Well, first of all, you need to make sure that your hook provides exigence. If you are doing the rhetorical analysis, so you are doing the rhetorical analysis essay, then you are probably going to need to give that context by summarizing the piece that you are going to analyze. So, if you are doing a rhetorical analysis of pain, you are going to need to summarize the pain piece so that people understand the context of the reading. But here's the trick. That summary needs to focus only on the important parts of the writing that are going to be addressed in your analysis. So, you don't want to give a terribly long summary. You want to get that summary down to 2, 3, 4 sentences, but you want them to be the 2 or 3 most important sentences for the reader to understand the arguments that you're going to make. So if you are doing pain and the 2 paragraphs that you're going to focus on are going to focus on pain's religious values for your first paragraph and pain's family values for his second paragraph, then when you are summarizing the piece that you read by Paine, you are going to focus on the parts of the piece that are most important, that's your exigence, for explaining his value system, because your paragraphs are going to focus on value. So you are going to do, in a rhetorical analysis, typically you do a summary. Sometimes in a rhetorical analysis, you will do a historical background. And what I mean by that is instead of simply summarizing the piece that you read, you're going to summarize the historical context. So you're going to talk about the American Revolution. But again, if you're doing a historical context, you are going to explain the important parts of the American Revolution as they relate to the value system and the values that the American revolutionaries held. Why are you going to focus on that? Well, you're going to focus on the parts that are important to give you exigence. You're going to focus on the parts that focus on values because that's what your body paragraphs are going to focus on. So, in a rhetorical analysis, summarizing the piece that you're reading or giving historical context for the piece that you're reading, those are going to account for 95% of your hooks. You then will take one or two words from this hook, mix it together with one or two words from your thesis, that's your bridge, and then, of course, the rhetorical analysis has the much more complex thesis where you have to hit all those moving parts, the author, the title, the message, and then the two rhetorical choices. So, what if you're not doing rhetorical analysis? What if you are doing an argument, including a DBQ argument? Well, if you're doing an argument, you still have to hit those two pieces, the exigence and the context. And this is where really one of the best things that you can pull out, because you should hopefully have it in your brain ready to go, is going to be the philosophers. If you pull out a philosopher, so let's say you are doing the dumbest generation. Well, pull out a philosopher that relates to that idea of dumbest generation. So maybe you're going to pull out Plato and talk about the allegory of the cave. Well, if you talk about the allegory of the cave, because it's Plato, it comes with exigence. These philosophers, these are the great thinkers that really have created the ideas that are the underpinnings of our society. So by focusing on such important thinkers, you kind of come into it with exigence as an automatic. But you can also focus on the context of what it is that you're trying to write about. So let's say that I'm doing the dumbest generation and I know what my two body paragraphs are. So I already know that I want to write about the fact that yes, the under 30s, kind of dumb when it comes to life skills, so you're going to agree with bomber line there. But no, the under 30s are not dumb when it comes to academic skills. So how do you get the context of that? Well, I am going to talk about Plato. I'm going to say, look, Plato believed that humans were locked into ignorance. He offered the metaphor of the cave and people being chained to the cave in a cave, watching a shadow show on the wall and mistaking shadows for the truth of things, simply because people are not able to perceive reality unless they go through the pain of walking into the light and of suffering and of working through that ignorance. Well, I may not focus on the entire allegory of the cave. I may focus on those parts that give context to what I'm saying. So I may focus on the fact that he believes that the default is that we are locked in a cave. So I may leave out the walking into the light part altogether, and I may focus on that he believes that by default, people are locked in a cave. They're locked in ignorance. And that young people, because they are young, they haven't yet gone through that growth where they have managed to break out of these chains of ignorance that Plato has described. Well, now you can see in my description of Plato's allegory of the cave, I'm already focusing on sort of the youth. I'm focusing on the starting place. Where is it that people start? They start in the cave. Why do I, when I'm describing Plato, focusing on youth and the starting place? Well, because that gives me the context for what I'm going to write about, which is young people. I'm certainly not going to write about, if I'm describing Plato's allegory of the cave, I'm not going to include the part where once people have knowledge and they come back into the cave, everyone else condemns them or targets them, that they become martyrs. That was certainly part of the allegory of the cave, but it has nothing to do with people who are under 30. So I am going to focus that part of the philosophy that I'm explaining in a way that it best offers context for the reader. Because it's a philosopher, it's already going to come with exigence. So, two choices. If you are going to go with rhetorical analysis, your hook is going to be either a summary of the reading piece or the historical context of the reading piece. But you're going to focus that summary or the historical context on whatever is going to be in your body paragraph. And that way you make sure you get that item number 2 of the rhetorical function, which is to give the reader a context for your position. So what if you are going to go for the argument? If you are going for an argument, you are going to focus on a philosopher. Philosophers are going to come with pre-built exigence, and you're going to describe the part of the philosophy that again focuses on the context of your body paragraphs. So hopefully that helps. Do me a favor, rewind, look at whichever part you need to look at in order to make sure that you're doing your introduction well. Now, if that's introduction, what's the other thing you need to take care of? Your conclusion. So, what does the conclusion need to have in it? Well, first, you're going to restate that thesis. But you want to be more powerful. Now, ironically, if you're in a timed writing on the AP test, a lot of times you have to do something that is not good writing. And that is you need to restate your thesis more powerfully. Absolutely, this is the truth. And then you just have to stop because you run out of time. They will give you more forgiveness for an incomplete conclusion than they will an incomplete introduction. So if all you have time to do on a timed writing is restate your thesis, then restate your thesis and move on. However, a take-home essay, you really do need to have a complete conclusion. So what else should you have in there? I taught you half of this rule when you were a freshman, and that is you have to make a reference back to the hook. So if you're doing the rhetorical analysis, you've got to go back to that history or summary hook. If you are doing an argument, you have to go back to that philosophy hook. But when you're making a reference back to the hook, what you need to connect to is the exigence. Look, you just gave me an entire essay. So tell me, in the context of that hook, why are your words important? Why is your essay important? So if you are telling me, if you're doing the DBQ, the dumbest generation, and you used as your opening philosopher Plato, well then in your conclusion, you need to bring it back to Plato and why it is so important for people to understand that people under 30 are no different than anyone else sitting in that cave, that it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with the fact that by default, it is easier to live in ignorance. So it's not just making a mechanical reference back to the hook, it's bringing it back to why was that hook important? And how does your paper, your position, your arguments, how do those fit into this topic and the importance of this topic for everyone to understand? So, what is the last thing you need to have in a conclusion? You have to go back to that real world connection. How does this paper fit into the real world? Why was this paper important enough to read? But here's what you have to understand. What you're trying to offer with that last sentence is a context for a contemporary reader. What is it that the modern reader who just finished reading your paper, what should they take out of this paper into the real world? What should they hang on to? The reader is not going to remember every sentence, every idea, every argument. So what you're telling them here is what is the real world significance that they should hang on to as they leave. So what do you want them to do? What do you want them to remember? What do you want them to believe? What do you want them to have in their life after they read your paper? What is it that's so important that this should not be an academic topic? This should be something that they take with them that changes the way they see the world. So that is intro and conclusion, sort of the rhetorical approach to it. If you go online and if you Google college introduction, college conclusion, you will find that there's a plethora of resources out there. And I use the word plethora correctly in that there are just almost too many things out there. When you are going out there to look for resources online, do me a favor, look for something that is sponsored by a college. And if you can, look for something that is labeled an OWL. An OWL is an online writing lab. And these are going to be websites put up by universities to help their students become better writers. Purdue has a very famous one. So, spell that right, P-U. So if you go and do a Google search for college intro, Purdue OWL, you will find that there are a lot of resources out there that can show you far more samples than I can. My only contribution to this is don't just think about the mechanics of it with hook, bridge, thesis, restate thesis, reference back, real world. Don't just think about the mechanics, think about the rhetoric. How is it that you are going to convince people that your words are important? What are you going to do to give people enough context that they will remember your argument? So, in your papers, you must have a college intro and a college conclusion in addition to the 2 or more body paragraphs. Good luck.